Do you have any, in Stripe and Brookfield, do you have any equity stock options?
I actually don't own directly any stocks in those companies.
Okay.
Just to be clear, I own nothing now. I own nothing but cash and personal real estate.
You cannot come back and say, oh, well, it was a misunderstanding. Well, I don't actually own them. I invest. No. Not only is Mark Carney's list of conflicts of interest longer than the Tour de France, the number of lies he is telling is also piling up, as Pierre Poilievre revealed blatant contradictory statements that Mark Carney said during the election that completely misled Canadians. And we found an instance that during the federal election, as a result of those lies, he may actually have already broken conflict of interest laws. Let's take a look.
Who works hard, can get a good, affordable life in a nice house on a safe street, that your success is determined by your hard work, not by government favoritism, that this is a meritocracy, not an aristocracy, where the government works for the working class, for the seniors, and for everyday people who build this country every single day. And that can only happen if the Prime Minister is focused on the public interest rather than on private interests. On Friday, we finally got a look at the Prime Minister's many financial interests that he kept carefully hidden throughout the election and about which he told numerous falsehoods during that same campaign. And so these are what the revelations tell us. One, that Mr. Carney was not upfront or honest with Canadians during the election. He made numerous false statements he would have known were false when he made them. Two, there is a cornucopia of conflicts of interest in these investments, like we have never seen before from a Canadian Prime Minister. Let me go through and document all of these claims one by one. First of all, during the election campaign, Mr. Carney said, and I quote, "I own nothing but cash and personal real estate, and that's not going to change in public life." Well, it turns out, while he said that, he knowingly owned 574 stocks and deferred profits and stock options in Brookfield and other companies. So it was patently and now provably false for him to say he owned nothing but cash and real estate. Two, my assets are now in a blind trust, so I don't know what exactly is in there. That too is false. He must have known what was in that blind trust because he was the one that filled out the paperwork for the Ethics Commissioner to report those holdings. So he knew exactly what was in his blind trust, and he just did not want Canadians to know before they went to the polls. Finally, he said, and I quote, "I do not have a connection with Brookfield Asset Management." Well, it turns out that he has continuing stock options and deferred share units in Brookfield Asset Management. And these options cannot be sold, or at least not easily, and we have no reason to believe they have been. So when he said that he had no connection to Brookfield, he was stating a patent falsehood. Now, why should we care? Why should Canadians care about this? Well, Mr. Carney has shown in the past his willingness to use his political connections in order to profit himself. For example, he said, let me see here, he gave public endorsement of Westinghouse in the leaders' debate. Westinghouse is a nuclear energy company which Brookfield is invested in. He has announced he's going to spend billions of dollars on modular homes. Brookfield is invested in modular homes. He says he wants to subsidize heat pumps. Brookfield is invested in heat pumps. He says that jet fuel, in the past he has said that he helped influence regulatory changes forcing aviation companies to buy certain kinds of jet fuel that one of his companies was invested in, so that air passengers have to pay more for their airline ticket to subsidize this specialty jet fuel that profits a company in which Mr. Carney had a financial interest.
Okay, so there's a lot there, and swing voters need to see this video because they need to see that the person that was being sold to them as the savior of Canada, the savior of the Liberal Party, the guy who has presented himself as the savior to the crisis that he wanted everybody to believe, is not who he says he is. This is demonstrably false. And we're seeing it now. And this is most likely why all of these assets were not disclosed prior to the election, so that Canadians could actually understand what entanglements the potential future Prime Minister actually would have, and then make an educated decision regarding their vote accordingly. So you have Mr. Carney saying this stuff. Now, don't take Pierre Poilievre's word for it. Don't take anybody's word for anything that you hear when they say, well, so-and-so said something. Go and try and find the source, as we've said. So, we tried to find it, and we did. This is back on March 26th, 2 days after the writ was dropped for the federal election, while Mark Carney was in Windsor, Ontario.
Hi, Mr. Carney. Mackenzie Gray with Global News. Just on your personal assets, do you have any, in Stripe and Brookfield, do you have any equity, stock options, or anticipate any future payments from either two of those companies?
So the first thing to say with respect to my personal assets is I have complied with all of the rules. In fact, I've over-complied with all of the rules in advance. So months and months and months in advance, and put in place both divestitures. So I actually don't own directly any stocks in those companies. But since I had worked at those companies, I put in place ethical screens. Okay. Just to be clear, I own nothing now. I own nothing but cash and personal real estate.
There you have it. I don't own stocks in those companies. That's not Pierre saying it. It's not me saying it. That's Mark Carney saying it. I don't own anything. I own nothing but cash and real estate. What is all of that? What is everything that dropped on Friday? Isn't it interesting that you were on vacation, not to be found, when everything dropped? It's unreal. Unreal that he tried to sell Canadians as a bill of goods. And even when Rosemary Barton asked the one question that was counter to the Carney narrative.
Are you saying you are not open to any conflict of interest?
Yes.
Someone spent most of his life in the private sector. There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will.
We find that hard to believe that you have no conflicts of interest. And he says, look inside yourself, Rosemary. Well, Mark Carney, how about you look inside yourself? Look inside yourself and actually realize you told Canadians, 40 million of us, blatant lies about your financial interests. Right there. It's not up for debate. It's right there. So you cannot come back and say, oh, well, it was a misunderstanding. Well, I don't actually own them. I invest. No. When you buy something, when you buy stocks, you own shares. And for you to say, I didn't own any stocks in Brookfield? Really? Let's take a look. Ladies and gentlemen, here's a copy of Annex A, which is part of Mr. Carney's disclosure. So it says, I've included in this annex my reasons for including each of the entities listed below. Entities being screened because I had a management position, oversight, role in respect of their investing companies on or prior to 2025. So these are all of the companies that he's actually been at. So he shouldn't be talking about these, and he shouldn't be involved in them. But if you go down to section C, you'll see entities being screened out of an abundance of caution because they have been identified by the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. This is not Mark Carney, this is the Ethics Commissioner saying this, based on the public record as of the date of the establishment of the Prime Minister's blind trust as being Brookfield related, even though I had no role in managing them and no direct financial interest in them. Well, isn't that interesting? Look at this. Brookfield. And more Brookfield. Folks, are you kidding? Are you kidding? And don't forget our previous video where we showed 16 pages of financial interests. And one of the companies that was in there is Westinghouse. Now, Pierre Poilievre mentioned this, but the interesting thing is Jagmeet Singh also had the same concern and voiced it immediately after the French leaders debate when speaking to the media. Check this out.
But a couple of questions remain, I think important questions in people's minds around Mr. Carney. One, he did not commit to closing offshore tax havens. Two, he still didn't disclose his interest in Brookfield Investments. And it's particularly interesting given his comments around Westinghouse, a nuclear company that is owned in part by Brookfield. So his interests are still outstanding and Canadians have questions.
So even Jagmeet Singh, even he caught this and was a little concerned by it. Let me show you what happened at the French debate, and then I'll provide you the translation so you can get the full context.
La couleur va être bleue.
Oui.
OK.
Est-ce qu'on doit,
Ripollution.
j'en ajoute une, j'ai plus le temps, mais je vous en ajoute une quand même. Est-ce on doit accélérer le développement de l'énergie nucléaire dans ce pays?
Oui.
Oui, absolument. Pour quelques raisons.
Partout, Québec, Ontario, dans
Ouais, c'est le choix de le Québec et les provinces. Mais nous avons un grand avantage ici au Canada. Nous avons l'uranium, c'est un des avantages. Nous avons des grandes sociétés nucléaires, y compris Candu, Westinghouse et puis de Cameco. Et les technologies de petits...
Donc, vous dites oui,
absolument oui,
ferme.
les grandes occasions.
All right, so those who speak French, you will know exactly what was said. For those who don't, this is what was said. So the moderator says, I'll add one more question, even though I'm out of time. I'll add one. Should we accelerate the development of nuclear energy in this country? Mark Carney says, yes, absolutely, for a few reasons. Across the country, Quebec, Ontario, yeah. It's the choice of each. Quebec and the provinces. Carney. But we have a big advantage here in Canada. We have uranium. Sometimes that's a disadvantage. We have major nuclear companies, including Candu, Westinghouse, and also Cameco, and technologies for small modular reactors. Absolutely big opportunities. This is where we believe there's a possible ethics violation. Before he even formed government. Why? Here's the thing. Back in 2023, Brookfield and Cameco acquired Westinghouse. Brookfield owns 51%. Cameco owns 49%. So why is that significant? Here's the problem. The moderator asks, as a national approach type of a question, should we be investing more in nuclear? Should we be building more nuclear? And Carney says, yes, absolutely. We have an advantage where we have lots of uranium and we have companies like Westinghouse and Cameco. Well, Cameco has invested in Westinghouse. Brookfield has invested in Westinghouse. You may be able to interpret this as, I think a lot of people would, that Mark Carney, who was Prime Minister at the time, by the way, is actually name dropping and endorsing Westinghouse, a company that he has a stake in. isn't it a conflict of interest that during a federal election, while you are the incumbent prime minister, and we don't have a sense of what your assets are because they hadn't been revealed, and he was going to wait the maximum amount of time to actually reveal them, which he ended up doing, that you are name dropping something when you're talking about the strategic plan for a country, to name drop a company as part of that potential strategic plan that you have investments in. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And if you don't believe me, and again, don't take my word for it, here's the press release from Westinghouse itself. November 7, 2023, Westinghouse Electric Company, Westinghouse acquisition by Brookfield and Cameco complete. Dropping down to the very bottom, Brookfield owns a 51% in Westinghouse and Cameco owns a 49% interest. Brookfield is pursuing this opportunity through the Brookfield Global Transition Fund, which is the largest fund in the world focused on the clean energy transition. This is unbelievable, folks. Well, you may say it's not surprising. It shouldn't be surprising for us because we've been trying to call out these issues and these concerns since Mark Carney stated his intent to run for the leadership of the Liberal Party. But this is the stuff that swing voters don't see. They don't see it because the vast majority of media doesn't report on it. And the most bizarre part about this press conference, unsurprising to many, but this whole press conference was called and structured around Mark Carney lying during the election about his conflicts of interest and the fact that they were disclosed on Friday, right? You would think, you would hope that of these journalists that were there, someone would ask a question about it. Someone would ask a question in any way related to the conflict of interest. Someone would ask a question in any way related to what Pierre Poilievre was actually talking about when it comes to that press conference. You would hope. Well, you would be disappointed. Not a single question was asked about this. And people are still wondering if there's any issue with the mainstream media, legacy media, receiving government money. Folks, this is why independent media is necessary. And this is why we will continue to call this out, because this is just disgusting how people aren't calling out probably Mark Carney's first ethics violation. And we hope the Conservatives take this to the ethics commissioner and point out that Mark Carney endorsing one of the companies that he actually has investments in prior to these financial interests being disclosed during a federal election where he was the prime minister, in our opinion, that's a clear ethics violation, and that should be called out.